Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the first session of the seminar, Political Economy of Construction, Design, Bureaucracy, Labor, and Money. This seminar is taught by our instructor, Daniel Young, and I'm going to read a little bit about the seminar description in 1 second, and then pass the word to Dan afterwards. So this seminar proposes a wandering exploration around the web of interconnected strata. The recently deceased George Bard coined the term political economy of construction as a tool to help us understand the decisions architects make when designing, as well as to distinguish established mainstream construction practices from luxury and premium construction materials and labors, setting aside experimental practices for now. And the seminar will present the practice of political economy of construction through a structured journey of interviews, conversations, readings of theoretical texts on architecture, economics, labor, and planning, beginning with political economy as a possible artistic practice, then moving to a study of urban building types and regulations such as zoning. We will progress to examine the conditions and organizations of labor in construction. And finally, we'll conclude with a discussion of the complex relationship between finance and construction. This seminar is taught by our amazing instructor, Dan Young. And Dan Young is a visual artist researching, among many things, the political economy of construction, also timber transportation economics on the west coast of Canada, and also interested in representing the psychology of social media, and currently based in Berlin. It is a pleasure to have Dan here with us today. Just one note of logistical note for the students and everybody. I'm filling in for the moderator Irfan Gyasi today. So on the other seminars, you might not see me. You will be seeing Irfan. And I'm sure you guys will be in great hands as well with both Irfan and with Dan. And yeah, that's all from me from now. Dan, please take it away.
Hey, thank you, Raphael, for that introduction. Thank you, that is here. Hopefully, everyone can do an introduction at the beginning of the next class. They can talk about where you are, some little bit of biography, and then what your interests are. Yeah. Oh, I just want to thank the News Center, which is so interesting. Oh my God. I'm always like, if I only had more time to spend with all the seminars. So yeah, it's so great. I'm being hosted to present this project. And yeah, it's great that you guys are supporting this really strange, unique intellectual, but it's also independent, which is also kind of interesting. And it's an interesting network of, I mean, it's really extraordinary. So that's cool that you guys are a part of it. I'm going to start with my lecture. If I don't like hearing myself talk, I have these little bits of text in the networks, I mean, in the slides. So if anyone wants to if anybody wants to, oh, what's happening? Uh-oh. Can people see this? I guess they probably can.
No, not yet. What's up?
Oh, really? Can you see
Yeah,
that?
no, we're not seeing.
Oh, really? Oh, sorry. Okay. Because I didn't hit share screen. Okay.
Yeah.
Share. Okay, here we go. Okay. Yeah, we can just start with this.
Yeah,
As you can tell,
here we are.
I'm not a pro. I'm actually surprised that this works. You can see the video.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, yeah, this is a film I made that started this all off called Every Building or Site That a Building Permit is Issued for a New Building in Toronto in 2006. I'll talk about this a bit more, but I'm actually surprised the video worked as a part of the Beginning of the class, so here's the first slide. Has basic information. Here is the 4 sessions. If you think about a text that you want to present about, please just like contact the moderator or myself, or send me an email, and yeah, that could make it more interesting and more conversation. Next week, we have one of my favorite books, which I have here, Topology, and we're going to make a copy for everybody. This is a little bit of administration. Oh yes, reading. I have some of these books I have physical copies of, which actually does make it easier to read. I suffer from screen burnout just like everyone else. What I do is I load my phone up with the PDFs of all the texts, and I walk around and listen, and that's how I consume the content, or I consume it lying down in bed. And I then go through the text afterwards like physically as a PDF. But I also, this is very embarrassing, I have made good use of ChatGPT to help me work my way through some texts. Sometimes, I don't know if it's like it's a kind of distraction problem, but I can kind of find all the I get kind of interested in all the red herrings or the strange directions that are lurking in a text, and I'm kind of missing the main point. So sometimes it's easier. But anyway, I'm only saying is I have a multi-strategy project for content consumption. I think we live in very exciting times regarding all these online PDF searching sites, and with multiple AIs. If you're interested in any topic, like I was interested in the Pacific Ocean and ravens because I live on the west coast of Canada at some point, and I just downloaded so many books, and I've been listening to those. So, anyways, I think there's lots of things. There's lots of detriment to our devices and screens and our attention, but there's also lots of exciting there's lots of exciting opportunities for discourse and learning and thinking and sharing. Okay, so this is where the course starts. But if I'm going to have some text I'm going to put on the screen, and if anyone wants to volunteer to read them, I don't know, maybe that can make this more interesting. So in some ways, I'd like to start from the very beginning, a kind of a world that is all that is the case. From my endless scrolling on Twitter, someone wrote, "We can think abstractly about the world only to the degree to which the world itself has already become abstract." Twos replied, "How about to the degree that the world itself has already become abstract? It encourages some, often quite problematic and ensnaring abstractions." My answer to the void is phenomena are outcomes of processes that synthesize multiple flows, materials, energy, and their proxies in language. Ideological lenses can refract these into a kaleidoscopic blur, or with careful focus, give a deep field of view. So that's my answer. On our wanderings, we see buildings, and we experience new ones being assembled. Before they are occupied, they almost seem as if they are a work of art, or perhaps a monument to the productive capacity of our economy. What to make of our experience of our built environment, both expensive and cheaply built, or maybe even bad? What are these conglomerations of material, labor, capital, and regulations? That is to say, if you want to understand our built environment and buildings as objects, I believe you should use political economy within place. And this is a beginning of a discursive wandering of why are things this way. George Baird, here we go. There's a photo of me interviewing him. He's in like probably a fancy part of Toronto. I don't know when I'm interviewing him. I don't know why he has this funny shadow. He was a kind of mentor and friend of mine in Toronto. He was at U of T. He came up with this concept of the political economy of construction when describing the Gehry residence. He would talk about how if we want to understand buildings and their outcomes and the choices designers make, you have to understand the process of how they're made and their budgets, basically. George, in some ways, was kind of one of the centers of architecture in the 1990s. And he's a little bit famous for this book, Meaning in Architecture, that he edited with Charles Jenks. Baird, I'm not sure if people are familiar with Kenneth Frampton. His philosophical frame was Hannah Arendt, and borrowed Arendt's concepts of civil society practice and representation and bourgeois space. I'm saying that because this is a school where there's a lot of philosophy, and Arendt comes up now and again, so I thought I'd make that connection. We should, on session 3, when we're talking about labor, we should actually return to this text. I am looking for more Baird, like some of Baird's lectures I recorded before he died. He uses this art historical method of multiple images and comparing images. This is, I believe that he wrote an actual review of the Gehry residence. I just can't find it. So this is the best I could find. And the Venturi Guild House is beside us, which was an old age residence. It's from 1961. I forget that it's that old. And there's an antenna in the center, though it's not showing up very good in this image. And the Gehry residence is from 1978. It's hard to believe the house is that old. It's famous for this chain link fence, and George has this great photo of it. And probably George took that photo himself, or Frank Gehry gave it to him. What is political economy? It starts with these 2 books, The Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations, into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, and The Principles of Political Economy and Taxation by Ricardo, about 2 centuries ago. And it's a sprawling fuzzy science. Off the top of my head, I would describe it as a systems theory that plus the state, and that would include regulations and subsidies, plus sociology and international markets. Now, I was corrected by AI that political economy equals material reproduction plus institutions, that's law, power, money across scales, local and global, which I don't know, did a better job than my description. The second description it gave me, or the second description I searched for, was system dynamics, state capacity, social structure, world markets, grounded in ownership and finance. There are so many traditions of political economy that I would encourage you to research it yourself. It would have to be a much longer course. But yeah, extremely interesting. Always stimulating and challenging. So I'm just going to pick one building. This is Ritterstrasse 50 by IFAU, and Jessica Fraser and two other people, Heidi and Von Bleckerath. It's Baugruppe on Ritterstrasse here in Berlin and Kreuzberg. I think most of them live in this building. This is a screenshot from a publication prior to construction. I went for the building's opening in 2012. I think this was published in 2010, summer 2010, and Arc Plus. And if you can think about the building perhaps with a series of lenses it's actually a pretty, if you want to be an architecture critic, this list is actually a pretty good guide for writing about buildings as objects. Experience, perception, its design lineage, property ownership. This is a Baugruppe. So the developers were ended up being the owners. They bought the property at auction. It might have had, it was cheap because there was soil contamination risk. It was financed after the Euro crisis, so money was extremely cheap. They had very standard construction companies build it, but it would have had a huge amount of prefabrication with wood panels, and all of this metalwork on the outside would have been fabricated out of sight. I have no idea about the contracting and risk management. Would have gone through a normal planning process. They're large units for having families. I make a joke, it's a kind of bohemian fortification in Kreuzberg. It has this community space that they've built into it for people to use. It's kind of interesting. It's double height. Sometimes they have concerts there, meetings. I don't know anything about the technical systems, probably triple glazed windows and in-floor heating. The design process, I'm not sure. But it is about maximizing value, and it's a building which doesn't care so much about its self-image. It's more about the quality of the floor plans for the owners. Culture and ideology, the Baugruppe self-building production ideology. I mean, it's interesting, this inequality and differences in an area of huge amounts of social housing that are actually more interesting, in some ways, more interesting buildings than this. I don't know anything about ecology and metabolism. That would be a longer conversation regarding the materials that were used and the quality of the design and how long the building's going to last for. Is anyone okay? I can't actually see people in this while I'm doing a lecture. But does anyone want to talk about this text? They can just unmute yourself and speak up. Or if you want to read the little bit of text I selected from it. Is nobody volunteering?
I could read from
Oh,
the
sure, please.
text on the side. Today, the different unities of atmosphere and of dwellings are not precisely marked off, but are surrounded by more or less extended bordering regions. The most general change that Derivé experiences lead to proposing is the constant diminution of these border regions up to the point of their complete suppression. Within architecture itself, the taste for derivating tends to promote all sorts of new forms of labyrinths made possible by modern techniques of construction. Thus, in March 1955, the press reported the construction in New York of a building in which one can see the first signs of an opportunity to derivate inside an apartment. Quote, the apartments of the helicoidal building will be shaped like slices of cake. One will be able to enlarge or reduce them by shifting movable partitions. The half-floor graduations avoid limiting the number of rooms, since the tenant can request the use of the adjacent section on either upper or lower levels. With this setup, 3 4-room apartments can be transformed into one 12-room apartment in less than 6 hours. Thanks.
But hang on, do you want to read
your text on the screen?
No. Maybe point 2, the translator's notes.
Yeah,
2.
awesome. So derive is literally drift or drifting. Like détournement, this term has usually been anglicized as both a noun and a verb. And then the second note is the derive, with its flows of acts, its gestures, its strolls, its encounters, was to the totality exactly what psychoanalysis, in the best sense, is to language. Let yourself go with the flow of words, says the psychoanalyst. He listens until the moment when he rejects or modifies, one could say detournes, a word, an expression, or a definition. The derive is certainly a technique, almost a therapeutic one, but just as analysis unaccompanied with anything else is almost always contraindicated, so continual deriving is dangerous to the extent that the individual, having gone too far, not without bases, but without defenses, is threatened with explosion, dissolution, dissociation, disintegration. And thence the relapse into what is termed ordinary life, that is to say, in reality, into petrified life. In this regard, I now repudiate my formulary's propaganda for a continuous derive. It could be continuous like the poker game in Las Vegas, but only for a certain period. Limited to a weekend for some people, to a week is a good average. A month is really pushing it. In 1953 to 54, we derived for 3 or more 4 months straight. That's the extreme limit. It's a miracle it didn't kill us. And that's from Ivan Chicheglov, an excerpt from a 1963 letter to Michelle Bernstein and Guy Debord, reprinted in International Situations, number 9.
That was a beautiful reading. Thank you so much. Please don't be afraid to volunteer again. The theory of the derive, in my rereading of this, I think of it as the body, the eye, and the mind as a scientific instrument, a breaking of one's established spatial practices, a kind of changing of one's knowledge systems. I mean, I don't want to say I'm an expert on this. I believe it's about their kind of moving to different districts of Paris, outside of urban bourgeois space, to places of manufacturing, working class. It's like a personal avant-garde practice of walking. I sort of think because of the global division of labor, you might have to, it's like sort of, you might have to take a flight or travel to have the same effect because of the way our economies and production of space operates now. But that's my conjecture. I just wanted to grab this as also a kind of wandering around the internet, wander around the text. So this was in the same issue that the theory of the derive was published. Same issue of Situationist International #2. And it was a series of questionnaires they had, a series of questions they had for people when they're walking around this area of Paris around Les Halles. And then I've included a painting of Les Halles. And I'm not sure if people are familiar with this part of Paris. This was demolished in the 80s, 70s, polished in the 70s. Around the same time, they also built the Pompidou Center and a big urban modernization, urban renewal. And I mean, it's considered a disaster. This is where all the food in central Paris was sold. There are these beautiful cast iron buildings that they didn't have to destroy, they destroyed them. So I thought that was an interesting piece to include. And also just on a kind of deriving around culture, reading the text, I was actually kind of more struck with the situationist place and kind of cultural lineage between the Romantics and Fluxus. And there is this motif of the open window that the Romantics were interested in. This idea of going outside. But I also like this next one by Carl Gustus Caras, with blocking the window with a canvas, or the canvas has, of course, the wander above a sea of fog, which always reminds me of this meme, which hopefully I get a laugh from you guys. Cognitive mapping. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this text. It's one of Jameson's greatest hits from the 90s. His idea of the social totality, which is a kind of the Marxist search for the logic of society being based in commodity production, is something he talks about in the text. It's interesting. This has been generally abandoned by serious, sophisticated writers and commentators and theorists in favor of an anthropologically defined spheres of autonomy and meaning making that are materially connected through the global economy. So this kind of social totality can be imagined within more localized spheres, that meaning making is local. But so it's interesting that Fred Jameson, he's interested in artists searching for the social totality. And famously, he talks about conspiracy films in the 1970s. Does someone want to read these 3 paragraphs?
Yes, I would like to read it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. You will be relieved to know that at this point we can return both to our own conclusion and to the problem of aesthetic representation and cognitive mapping, which was the pretext of this essay. The project, cognitive mapping, obviously stands or falls with the conception of some unpresentable, imaginary, global social totality that have been mapped. I have spoken of form and content, and this final distinction will allow me at least to say something about an aesthetic, of which I have observed that I am, myself, absolutely incapable of guessing or imagining its forms. That postmodernism gives us hints and examples of such cognitive mapping on the level of content is, I believe, demonstrable. I have spoken elsewhere of the turn toward a phonetics of mechanical reproduction of the way in which the autoreferentiality of much of postmodernist art takes the form of a play with reproductive technologies as film, tapes, video, computers, and the like, which is, to my mind, a degraded figure of the great multinational space that remains to be cognitively mapped. Fully as striking on another level is the omnipresence of the theme of paranoia and expresses itself in a seemingly inexhaustible production of conspiracies plots of the most elaborate kinds. Conspiracy, one is tempted to say, is the poor person cognitive mapping in the postmodern age. It is the degraded figure of the total logic of late capital, a desperate attempt to represent the latest system, whose failure is marked by its slippage into sheer theme and content. Achieved cognitive mapping will be a matter of form, and I hope I have shown how it will be an integral part of a socialist politics, although its own possibility may well be dependent on some prior political opening which its task would then be to enlarge culturally. Still, even if we cannot imagine the productions of such an aesthetic, there may, nonetheless, as with the very idea of utopia itself, be something positive in the attempt to keep alive the possibility of imagining such a thing.
That was beautifully read. That was incredible. Thank you. And there is something of being in a space with people while text is being read. It's almost like cinema. So I'm going to try to continue this tradition moving forward. Okay, this is where I'm starting an artist talk. And you have to imagine me a young person, and the theory of the derive and cognitive mapping are in my not quite subconscious, but they're in my mind. And that Fred Jameson would have disagreed with my method, because it would have been too materialist. So I started with a short film, and basically I was interested in how Toronto, the city I was living in, people were talking about how it was changing. It was a period of reurbanization, of intensification of migration, and the construction boom that it's maybe just ended now, was starting. When people were talking about how Toronto was changing, they were just kind of talking about the downtown. They weren't thinking systematic about the entire city. So what I did was I called up City Hall and asked for a list of building permits I removed all the single family homes, and I was going to shoot on a video, but video in 2008 was kind of ugly, and we had access to motion picture cameras. So I got a motion picture camera, and I went around and shot all the buildings at three-quarter angle. And then I assembled it into a loop. And we can kind of think of it as a kind of a crop of new urbanism. I mean, it was obviously a critique of how ugly Toronto is, but at the same time, it didn't offer any frame of critique because it felt like critique was Europeanized good taste, and Canada being a colony, in some ways we try to reject European frames. And it's interesting now, it could almost be considered a Yes in My Backyard film. Anyways, there's about 126 shots. Well, after I made that film, I thought I wanted to make a film about Canada and a film about infrastructure, where I was talking about what is Canadian identity, what is this country, and perhaps it is its infrastructure, which was kind of, literally what the country's made of. And we can think about it as a kind of mega structure, like a single technical system. There was no list I could use, so I needed to make the list myself. I had some letterhead from the National Gallery, and I made a series of information requests and tried to curate my own list of what is Canada's infrastructure. And I drove around for 3 months, covering more than 60,000 kilometers, shooting dams and bridges. And this is the pipeline for a water transportation system. I was doing all this work at the time with Christian Giroux. Here's the book we made. Here in Berlin, in around 2012, I had the opportunity to make a project here. And people very much responded well to my Toronto film. And there was also the post financial crisis construction boom, which was that money was cheap. Berlin had still a lot of empty space from the bombing of World War II. And people wanted to own property in Germany in case the euro broke up. And I wasn't just interested in remaking the same art here. So I wanted to make a film about history, and I wanted to capture the changing aesthetic through geopolitical change. And it's kind of like, so we can think of the film as 2 tracks. One track is 2013, and the other track is 1983. So we're traveling alongside each other, and the kind of the difference between the two is history. I thought it was going to be very exciting film, but actually it turned out to be more of a we're lost in the suburbs, and we get a kind of Prussian vernacular unfolding over time. In some parts, it's hard to believe anything's changed. I worked with a team of photographers, and these are all of our working maps that we use when we were shooting, and we put them up on a wall. And we showed this at the German Center for Architecture, the DATS. It shows, because there's so much generic building, it kind of made them cry in some ways, because it's a place where they believe buildings should be individually crafted for their clients instead of things picked out of a catalog. This is the shot that I was desiring, kind of like a condo building or a new fancy development beside some gray communist block, with some high Stalinism behind it. But this is a very small portion of the actual project. We made it into a large book. Oh, hang on. This is because I want to be clear about my communication to you guys. I put this slide in. We can understand these projects to be an attempt to disrupt discourse with experience. Yes. Both in Toronto, I put the slide in for a reason, because sometimes I just give descriptions of the projects and I forget the point I'm trying to communicate. In some ways, discourse just develops in strange directions, partly because the people are gatekeeping the discourse or editing the discourses. And it can feel very overwhelming, challenging these discourses. So in my attempt to make a addition to these discourses, both about urbanism in Toronto and Canada and here in Berlin, I was trying to make an experience. And I think this comes to one of the crux of this session, or what I'm trying to attempt to communicate, is about working on our metacognition of discourse versus experience, and how we think differently through artworks, through cinema, social media, the novel, but also the recuperation of experience into discourse, and how all these forms operate. Yeah, I mean, I like, for example, you go into a museum, you can feel your brain looking, but then you look at the text and how the visual can be short-circuited by language. But yeah, I guess, anyways, we'll come back to this. Oh, hey, look, I made this graph for the last time I gave this lecture, and it is about the challenge of heuristics, experiences of deterritorization. Anne Lin, the editor of Arc Plus, described the project as an imaging machine to destroy the established image of Berlin, which I thought was interesting. Here we go. This is like a book that's a kind of part of the cult of the city. We were always traveling. This is like at this word on the side, Bosphorodic, is how the ox plows. And so we were always traveling from east to west. No, from east to west to east to, yeah, first we would travel from the west to east, and then we would switch. Okay, and so this is what I was trying with. I was trying to make a new project. I kind of abandoned it. It's called Vancouver's Political Economy of Construction in 100 fragments. And I wanted to use discourse in the form of characters speaking as an experience rather than a description. No, I mean, rather than an image. So it's kind of the speakers making their own description. But I wanted to preserve their the anthropological context in some ways, or preserve their character. Anyways, this was my diagram I made of how I was trying to, this device that I called, this conceptual device of my art making, which I called the prototype, which is always changing. And for this project, trying to make a political economy of construction in Vancouver, I was, and here's I wasn't giving this lecture to an art audience last time. They were geographers, so I wanted to have this. Jamie called it a method of collage, and I was saying it's a montage, and that perhaps there is a narrative, because like the brain experiences narrative as if it's an equation, and by presenting a complete data set, it can feel like it's a conclusion. So a kind of a narrative pathway through what seems like a local totality or system can produce the experience of satisfaction or conclusion. The experience of a map, you can say. This is where we get to Roberto Bolaño. I know I didn't assign these two huge books. Maybe people are familiar with him. I gave this essay called The Labyrinth, not essay, short story called The Labyrinth, which is about this collection of intellectuals in Paris. I'm going to say the journal's name wrong, Keltel. Which is also so incredible that it starts with this photo that he found. We are, hang on, does anyone, here, I'm going to stop sharing the screen so I can see everybody. Hang on, I'm going to try to do this. Does anyone want to say anything about that just incredible, sorry, I can't find my, whoops. There we go. Here we go, we have everyone here. Does anyone want to say anything about that short story? No, okay, it's fine. Does someone want to volunteer to read these next texts? I'm not quite jockey with Zoom screen share lecture. Could we have a volunteer speak up and read this?
Okay, I can read it.
Excellent.
Just a second. Let me zoom a little bit. Okay. So, Bolaño's wanderings acquainted him with the several Spanish vernaculars and much local slang, just as his literary career brought him into contact with well-spoken people, and his poverty into contact with the poor. But in The Savage Detectives, he doesn't overdo the local color, which his superb translator Natasha Weimer in any case wisely ignores. Their narrators are individuated, above all, through our sense of helplessness, of helpless particularity of their fates, and to the extent that they sound alike. This is explained and excused by their common situation, testifying for an oral history, and the flattening effect of speech in any language. Above all, Bolaño overcomes the problem of getting so many voices to comment on the same events or sing to the same music. By letting each voice persist in its natural egocentricity, true, the reader is liable to protest somewhere before page 200 that this book isn't about anything. Later on, it's possible to recognize with admiration that Bolaño has found a way to keep the novel alive and freshly growing in the sonora of modern skepticism, our skepticism, that is, as to what can finally be known or said of any life, and whose life is worth being represented or considered representative in the first place. But this triumph in the face of skepticism is the triumph of strange belief. No one can fail to see that in Bolaño's poetry functions much like a religion, as a promise of the meaning of earthly existence, as well as of dignity, fellowship, and redemption. And yet, if Bolaño and his more autobiographical narrators believe religiously in the value of poetry, they also appear somehow to believe in salvation by faith rather than by works, such as the faith Martin evidently kept by remaining true to his vocation in spite of his manifest lack of talent. This desperate and even delusional persistence wins for Bolaño a measure of respect, and Bolaño's justification for having arranged the Savage Detectives around several poets who left behind them only hazy memories, and little if any durable verse, would likewise seem to be that Lima, Garcia Madero, and the selfsame Bolaño lived with poetic desperation and sincerity, no matter what poetry they wrote or failed to write. Pilgrims rather than saints, they lived towards literature without ever quite reaching that condition.
That was beautifully read. Thank you very much. Does someone also want to read these two paragraphs?
I can read.
Please.
Just as the first and third sections of The Savage Detectives employ the casual, subliterary form of the private diary, the middle section uses another informal documentary medium, oral history. Instead of a single diarist, we now have 38 narrators, many from Mexico City, others from various European and American countries. All of them the sometime friends, former lovers, or passing acquaintances of Bolaño and or Lima. These many narratives, their words dateline with time and location, recount to the best of their knowledge and recollection what happened to Bolaño and Lima after their adventure in the Sonora as the two wandered countries and continents. One of the most moving voices belongs to the institutionalized Quim font, who, as in some surrealist country and Western song, lost his Ford long ago of his mind. It's something close to a miracle that Bolaño could produce such intense narrative interest in a book made up of centrifugal monologues, spinning away from two absentee main characters and the diary entries of its most peripheral figure. And yet, in spite of the book's apparent and often real formlessness, a large part of its distinction is its virtually unprecedented achievement in multiply voice narration. The confessional or first-person novel done in multiple voices was an important modernist mode, a logical extension of the tendency towards authorial space effacement that we associate with Flaubert. English speakers, thanks. English speakers will think of the Nighttime or the Nightown section of Ulysses Dos Passos, USA, the waves in probably the most successful several of Faulkner's novels. The mode is extremely challenging, and several pitfalls open even beneath Faulkner. The novelist may rely exclusively on cognitive eccentricity, especially mental illness, to differentiate his narrators. The sound and the fury, as I lie dying, or else may invest in the narrators more or less equally, and therefore implausibly, with his own voice. Absalom. Another challenge, if the narrators come from a diverse social background, derives from the author's inevitability, unequal familiarity with these. Monica Ali's Aligento, Blue, is a recent example of the difficulty of pulling off an oratorio novel.
That was also beautifully read. Thank you. I'm going to read this. Yeah, so I was hoping to use, I mean, this is totally insane that I thought I could pull this off. Bolaño as a kind of, I was trying to synthesize them with my prototype as a series of interviews, transcribed interviews of wandering around the Vancouver construction industry. And that we would be able to, the audience be able to make a cognitive whole. In some ways, I mean, George Baird, like many architectural theorists, like to be provocative and capture audiences and have authority, but perhaps never worked himself all the way through of the implications of his provocations. So it was in some ways continuing, I was inspired by Baird. And I would be able to help to answer this question of why could everything be so expensive but so value engineered, this kind of simultaneous feeling of, I don't know, I'm sure people experience this kind of everything being expensive and cheap at the same time. Okay, the artist talk, the portion is over. I thought it was a good way to start the seminar. And of course that inspired the presentation of materials, and is why the New Center asked me to do this. I think we should take like a 10-minute break, and then we can come and talk about this rather interesting book, An Engine Not a Camera, by Donald Mackenzie. Maybe, yeah, if we can come back, I'm going to stop the share. Sorry. Maybe we can come back in 10 minutes. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to block myself.
Yes.
Okay, I made myself some tea. Before I talk about the Donald Mackenzie book, does anyone have anything they want to share about the that reading? I mean, it's just interesting for me because I already know what I think about it, but it would be, there's any strong impressions made? so I'm just going to go into the lecture, but please jump in if somebody would like. Oops, hang on. Screen. Okay. So the reason for including this book is it's like the exemplar example of when a theory or framework becomes performative. And I wanted to continue this conversation with my own struggles with frameworks, lenses, heuristics. And like many of the texts, I found myself getting actually just caught up in the own world, like the own world of this text. So it wasn't really proving my point. I mean, it just starts with this incredible opener of the 1987 financial crash and this small network of financiers. One of them who was an immigrant from Poland during World War II, which is itself its own incredible story. How their small network was able to keep this financial network going. So it's just an incredible beginning that you just a complete distraction from what I'm trying to say, but it itself is one of the very small insider networks of people that know each other, keep things going. I settled on this graph as the kind of portion, this drawing, as the portion I wanted to zoom in on together, with these 4 examples of where theory becomes performative. I'm just going to read them. The generic performativity, an aspect of economics of theory, model, concept, procedure, data sets, is used by participants in economic processes. Effective performativity, the practical use of an aspect of economics that has an effect on the economic processes. Okay. Barnesian performativity, a practical use of aspects of economics that makes economic processes more like their depictions by economics. And counter-performativity, practical use of an aspect of economics that makes economic processes less like their depiction by economics. Thought this was really very interesting to think that I was interested in the lens being a filter and how our societal thinking about and criticism can it ends up helping distort the world. but then he has these 4 examples of where perhaps, that's either not doing much or it is distorting, or it's actually like a correct representation. Yeah, it wasn't really what I thought I was going to find. It's not what I remembered in the text, or it's not quite what I thought I was going to find. It was very surprising. So, I mean, what I learned in graduate school was to say it depends, which, I mean, Mackenzie's such a careful scholar. He doesn't want to overstate his case regarding the performativity. Interestingly, the book was published in 2006, and he might have taken a different tone if it wasn't if it was after the 2008 financial crash. Because it was everybody's financial models that were incorrect description of risk that had real world economic consequences. Personally, I would have thought about macro finance or international political economy, that being the demand for financial assets, as one of the drivers of this financialization. I assume that the correct answer is, but this could be wrong, and I wasn't researching this, but that the development of all this finance expertise and models like the Black-Scholes equation for options trading and derivatives in the United States co-evolved with the demand for American dollar-backed financial products and assets. I could be wrong about this on either side, but that also seems like a kind of trendy position to take, like coevolution. I don't want to overstate causality, but I would make an even larger frame than Mackenzie to understand the structure of the world system and how America exports these financial assets. That would have been my answer. Another thing I stumbled upon in the text was, here we go. We got a photo of Donald Mackenzie and Bruno Latour. And he talks about Latour and actor network theory. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that actor network theory. How I would define it, it's the systems of human and non-human, and the non-human are both inanimate and animate systems, including some black boxes that we don't have knowledge of. And of course, I'm corrected by AI that has a better description. A method for describing how action happens through networks of humans and non-humans, where agency is distributed across people, devices, texts, standards, institutions, and materials, and not located in one heroic subject. I actually tend towards actor network theory as a better descriptor for the construction industry, but it feels less modular and harder to think with. And it doesn't have the same, one of the criticisms of actor network theory is that there's less political agency within it, or there's less political levers or buttons to push. And here is the AI answer. And I just want to make sure I'm just the computer voice, the computer answer, and my personal voice are separated. So I want to acknowledge the computer talking, the very large computer, and is better describing how construction actually happens, the social, technical chain, documents, devices, standards, schedules, inspections, BIM objects, contracts, materials, how agency is distributed, how things get stabilized and black boxed. Political economy is better at answering so what and for whom, ownership, rents, wages, bargaining power, state subsidy, profit, displacement, inequality, and who gets stuck with what risk. So that's actually pretty good. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with actor network theory. This is me just challenging myself. I wasn't planning to talk about this, but it is an interesting comparison. And here, I believe, is my final slide in my lecture. My intended use for Mackenzie was to show us how scholarly works, how lenses are also filters, lens never neutral. I mean, the famous example is how finance and accounting account some things and externalizes the costs, within ecology, would be the famous example. And this has been my own personal growth, is becoming intellectual means learning how to use these tools without them overpowering you. Also not letting a network overpower you. Interesting. And we need these lenses to think with. These are the tools, but they can also be a poison in our own thinking. So I would use the allegory of the pharmacon. It's about the dosage. And what I do like about political economy is there's so many different traditions that you can switch up the lenses and to hide. Like, for example, at some points, a neoclassical lens of markets can be very useful, and can be a critique of this is the YIMBY critique, the yes in my backyard critique of bureaucratic quagmires of process but not outcomes. I wanted to end with this kind of screen capture from some random Twitter bind. You spend your entire career flitting with one research model to the next, each one nearly misleading as the last, before landing on the last reality that your life you live is the only really accurate experimental system. Okay. And, oh, hang on. We have this. I invite Thomas to speak about this beautiful drawing, this graph that he sent in as part of his reading memo. Thomas, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes,
Thank
okay. To kind of start the conversation, let's start the discussion. I just added this. This is so excellent. Thank you so much. Do you want to tell us about how you came across this and how we should read it?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Daniel, and hi everyone. About this diagram, I came up with I am a researcher about the complex systems. So I came up with this scholar, Frank Giles, that he proposes the multi-level perspective framework to understand basically how trends transition between time with three perspectives: technological niches, socio-technical regimes, and landscape developments. So basically, yeah, it's very complex, but how culture, technology, policy, economics, science, markets uh, intermingle in this tunnel and change trends, basically like how a complex system works with feedback loops, and yeah,
And
that's
what
it.
is how would you describe this landscape developments portion at the top? I found that both interesting and confusing. Is that like the global marketplace, or is that actual landscapes?
Yeah, actual lands. I what I understand is that is the actual landscape, the physical um, landscape you see like in nature, urbanism.
But then we have like this text: landscape developments put pressure on regime, which opens up creating windows of opportunity. I was thinking it was like the horizon line of the global market, or like, yeah, geopolitical context, um macro the atmosphere of macroeconomics. Those would be the allegories that I would
Okay.
ask for.
Yeah, I am not familiar with that type of research in economics, but yeah, you could be right.
Okay, but it's pretty cool. I've never seen it before. Um, and I think it was also looking at some of these questions that I would start with. Is that if we're trying to understand a political economic construction, if we're trying to understand these complex objects that make up urban systems, you could almost see that we're looking at yeah, I think it's a very useful and intriguing graph. It's from a slightly different perspective than I would have imagined. So thank you so much. It's so excellent. I'm just going to stop staring my screen so I can also see everybody. It's very difficult speaking. It feels like I'm just speaking to myself, and so it can get a little bit confusing. Thank you for joining me and us together. And thank you for those that read some text. Would anyone like to add to the conversation? We have just under an hour.
Yeah, I was interested. Yeah, I was interested in the Alexander text, the last one that you presented, kind of on like financial theory.
Oh yeah.
Cause
The Patrick McKenzie is
Patrick McKenzie, sorry.
Donald McKenzie, sorry, Donald McKenzie.
Yeah. Because I've always felt like, I mean, I think there's been an interesting shift in like public perception of like financialization.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know if it happens to everybody, but I definitely feel as like, you know, this kind of like algorithmic like male 20 to 35 group as like a person on the internet. Like my social media to a certain degree is like full of like people selling me stocks and like poly market, and like I think that there's been an interesting like opening up of financialization. But it's also very strange because it kind of gives that, like, going back to what you were saying about the cognitive mapping, it definitely feels like there's like a very interesting like like cognitive weight, like you're saying, to these things, where to some degree it's like, well, these financial systems kind of rule us, right? To a certain degree, they kind of like they kind of operate in this way where they kind of move cash flow in ways that we kind of think that the world runs on these financialization systems. But there's also like levels of abstraction in them where we think that like by playing into them and like getting into them, we might kind of get into that cash flow, because it was really interesting to see kind of names pop up, because I had read this really crazy novel in the beginning of the year. I was Googling it and it was very interesting. I don't think there's an English translation of it, but it's in Spanish, it's called El Reemplazante, which is like the replacer. And it kind of, I was wondering if maybe that was an interesting conversation too about the levels of abstraction and cognitive dissonance, where the novel basically is this French researcher who's into high frequency trading. And he kind of has this novel where he kind of presents his research in as like speaking as an algorithm. So he kind of makes up this character of a trading algorithm speaking about the history of trading algorithms. And kind of the basis of the story and his kind of proposition that I thought was really interesting in is that this story of models and how there's certain degrees of abstraction and how models didn't really matter, where they weren't referring to real life solutions or real life problems. They were kind of just moved to recreate the like the propositions of these models. Kind of how he positions it is that there was a shift from the economy referring to actual things, right? I think even in the text they mention about how like you can purchase rice futures on rice that hasn't been planted. He kind of speaks on a term of like algorithmic and technology, in this idea where like at some point most of like these exchanges and stocks were actual people buying them, but we're at a point now where most of financialization is literally like machines trading with each other, and that there's been a really interesting like movement in infrastructure where most of the infrastructure now in like these big financial, the SP 500 and the stock exchange are all just like data transfer. And there's been like, and so his kind of position in the book, and it's kind of, I thought it was an interesting one because I really didn't know anything about this, was that finance is not even like a human endeavor anymore at cognitive scale, at literal scale, and it's literally just machines moving money around at speeds that we couldn't even imagine, with infrastructure that kind of takes over a lot of things. I know that I guess in Europe and in the America, there's a lot of conversation now about like data centers and like optic fiber pipelines and all that stuff. So I was thinking, I was wondering too, if like in this kind of political economy idea and these ideas that you had about financialization as these abstract things, like how did also like computing and computers and data infrastructure also come in to play with that conversation?
I'm not prepared to answer that as you said a lot. You said a lot of different things, which is incredible. I also like this bringing in a literary example. That was pretty interesting, actually, about the algorithm telling a history of trading algorithms. You should make sure to send me the reference for that book. But to talk about the specifics of, even just the title of the Donald Mackenzie book, An Engine, Not a Camera, is about an image of an economic system, would be a description of how it works. But like an engine, these financial theories, you can then, they almost become like, an engine is also a pump as well, right? So it becomes like a pump for the economy that these theories can end up working on. And what you're talking about would be, it's almost like Donald Mackenzie's giving the prehistory of the space that you're describing of being like sold financial products, or this kind of retail stock space, space of stocks. He's inside this kind of like a professional finance space. What I think is also really remarkable about that text is like the description of grain trading and how this involves all this like physical infrastructure. And this does have uses for people that actually want to hedge their profits or losses if you're a farmer or a purchaser. So there are real uses for this isn't just a place of pure financial speculation. If I wanted to continue speaking about what you were saying, I would say it is interesting how the retail people have been able to command aspects of the market, and sometimes like, whose market is this? At some point, it has been for retail, gamified, consumers of financial products. In some ways, you can describe them. And I mean, it's not like in Germany, I live in Germany part-time. And in Germany, if you wanted to understand their place in a sort of international political economy, and China is very similar, actually, it's a place of repression of capital and of labor. They keep wages down and they keep the return on capital low so that they can have a physical industry of exporting real things, of being manufactured goods. And China's copied a little bit of their playbook. And they would both be responsible for keeping wages low in their country, so they also don't export, so they don't consume enough of the world's products as well, right? And that, could I ask where you're located?
I'm right now in Mexico City. I'm in Mexico.
Oh, okay. So you're in Mexico. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the financial world in Mexico. I assume because you're talking about Polymarket and I thought you were perhaps in the United States. Yeah, I mean, there's this America. It's a place where maybe one of the problems is that everyone expects such a high return on investment, perhaps like a 15% return on investment is sort of the hurdle rate. And that only allows for certain type of high return, low investment types of venture capital does very good in that atmosphere. It's not so good for infrastructure investment. It's very great for financial products. It's fantastic for speculation. It's one of the things that we could describe. We could describe the loss of manufacturing. We can also think, to bring it back to the building of the physical environment, this stick-built, drywalled houses with lots of square footage, perhaps of low quality, made with maybe, undocumented labor that keeps wages low. We could also imagine that being part of the political economy of construction in the United States. That sort of also fits into perhaps some of the space that you're describing of speculation and high returns as a kind of atmosphere. Am I being a good conversation partner? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, because I look at it from kind of the perspective of, I mean, I think, I don't know if it was my environment. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, which I also think is a place where kind of, I think maybe in Puerto Rico as kind of like this like very strange resort tourism based kind of like US colony that for a long time, I don't know if it was just my own experience or also kind of like a great like a larger kind of like conceit. I think that I was like very far away from like like deep economic thinking or like financialization or like markets. Like it was just stuff that I think never really got mentioned anywhere around on the island or anywhere around kind of the spaces I was in. And I feel that there was a particular shift on like social media and like US trends. And I think a lot of it had to do with what you're saying with like this, like the after like the Silicon Valley boom of like speculation and venture capitalism. I think there was, and like crypto, like I think there was like a very big shift towards it, like financial products and like almost like also like I think people have talked about like the gamification of this, where there's also like a thing of like, well, in front of all these infrastructure lacks, in front of all these like failures of like mainstream and like current like government and social cohesion in the US, I guess there's also been a lot of like, hey, well, like if all this is like shitty, right? They talk about like enshittification. Maybe you can like hedge the losses, like betting on like whatever thing is like hot right now in like the Reddit stock you're in or the small like community on Discord you're in that kind of talks about financial products.
Yeah, you're articulating what I would find to be a contemporary narrative about the United States, of which I've run into myself. I'm not actually part of. I'm not in that space myself, although I've heard it described many times. So I do appreciate you enriching me with this description. Yeah, it's a bit depressing, but it is an interesting evolution. I think that usually part of the narrative they talk about people's checks they got during COVID, and then people being at home, and then there not being this like sports betting, and and then yeah, also just like the spectacle of the American stock market. That is, I mean, in some ways, it's like a utopia dystopia of, we have the most productive firms, you split them up into very small pieces, and you distribute them, and anyone can, participate. And we can mobilize the world's savings into productive investment. It's interesting if you were to, there's been the stock market's it's rocketed up, but also gold has rocketed. Now, if you were to take all the gold in the world, it like, this is Warren Buffett talking at this point. Take all the gold in the world, it's like a cube that you could describe, right? It's actually not so big. And it'd be worth, I don't know, some amount of money. But if you took all the value of that gold and you put it in the stock market, or you gave it to productive people in the economy, they would have gone and done something with all of that savings. And then if you were to look at the gold 1 year later, it would still just be this big, huge block of yellow metal. But interestingly, this year, the price of gold, this yellow metal, I mean, it has some industrial uses, but this is for geopolitical reasons. But yeah, the price of gold has it's basically gone up with the stock market. A lot of this has to do with there's just so much liquidity in the liquidity in the system of all this newly created money from the COVID era, and it had to find a place to go, and it ended up in the American stock market because partly because of AI, partly because of past returns suggest future returns. Gold is up partly because of geopolitical reasons of central banks trying to migrate away from U.S. assets. So it's, I mean, you know, narrating markets, it's difficult because there's like a line and a few bits of data, and you don't have all the sociological information to make a correct, informed description of the processes. But yeah, it's our final session is on it's on all this. It's how the construction industry has been warped by the low interest rates, and buildings are made into assets, and yeah, this complex relationship between finance and construction. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this, and I'm excited to include you in that, and I'll be able to introduce you to several finance thinkers in that I kind of, you know, can talk about sociological trends and macroeconomics and these things interlinking, and how I think it's just as I started the class, we have these phenomena that we try to disentangle the drivers that produce them. And we do that through having several intellectual tools that we can call lenses. And that together we can imagine this as the practice of political economy, and you artists and creative people can participate in this discourse and make use of it. And we can even try to ground it in characters such as the novel that you were talking about. Is that okay? Okay, sorry, that was difficult intellectual work for me. Does anyone have something to add to the conversation? So there's more than just I have to say the people who read, they did such a beautiful job. That was so beautiful. It was so incredible. I'm going to try to do that more later on.
I kind of like wanted to point out as well on this connection between like this commodification of finances, or like just this financial literacy that our kind of like generations are starting to gain. I mean, I'm talking from a European perspective, but just like the massive housing crisis that we are all experiencing, and how I'm also like what Luis was mentioning when it comes to this bombarding on, download this app or start learning investing and all that stuff. And how, at least from I'm now based in Spain, like from a Spanish point of view, I see that the only way out for people is actually to invest into this, index funds from the States, like there's like this top 10, worldwide most successful companies, and how you're just allocating every month, like if you would be able to do it, allocate every month some money to eventually like just be able to retire, since obviously like all the retiring systems will basically like by the time probably non-exist, so I also find this connection between systems, of capital, and how things are just somehow, and all this speculation and hope that we put into, like
Yeah,
like
yeah, you're talking about two different things at once. So can we focus just on the housing situation where you are? Do you want to describe that? Because
sure. I mean, I'm based between Berlin and currently also in Mallorca in Spain.
okay.
So I kind of like see or I think, I mean, experience, but yeah, I think when it comes to the rentals and just like, our generations not being able to afford like just any, even rental, like just, rooms in like metropolitan cities and stuff like this. And obviously, depending on then just like the actual like city or country where you are, like there is then all these extra like industrial factors. What as you were mentioning about Germany with all these exports and wages, and how just like I feel like that's kind of like this trade-off between generations of like our the generation of our parents at the time having much more economical power than us, and thus being able to maybe at least buy a house for the family somehow, and just like how that's at least from my generation completely it will never be possible, and the only way at least is to protect yourself through again this potential way of retiring, and again putting all this money into these index funds, like so it's, I mean, I'm just going back to this connection, but I just we were just gravitating towards these points before, and I just wanted to yeah make my
Yeah, I mean,
connection.
I have a narrative around the housing situation that I will articulate later on. Um, it's basically like we just need to build more housing.
Mhm.
And it's also migration. But it is interesting that this blending of the financial imagination of speculations, kind of how that's become popularized as the way out of predicament. So thank you for sharing that. Um, I found it very interesting. Let's hope we're going to follow up on these themes later in the next three sessions. So it's let's stick a pin in it. Anyone else want to add, please? Any thoughts or impulses?
I'll just add some thoughts to the conversation, but they're pretty inconclusive. I'm just kind of curious. But I feel like, or I'm just like kind of talking about market economy. Y'all were talking about specifically earlier, like speculative marketing, you brought up like poly market. I'm thinking about call sheet, but also that's not what I'm trying to talk about actually. But it really makes me wonder of like when we're looking at our economic conditions, we look at like in a global condition we existed, the economics and how we're perceiving what ways we're supposed to progress or like exhibit a comfortability. It made me kind of be brought back to the last sentence within the cognitive, or one of the sentences in the cognitive mapping reading, in which I'm trying to remember the Frederick Jameson is talking about kind of like the stages of capitalism and how that forms a spatiality. and specifically talking about at the end or mentioning listening, the denaturalization of desire and its ultimate displacement by commodification or success. And it really had me thinking while you were talking, like with this chicken and egg sort of procedure of like, I guess specifically thinking about this global housing crisis that's occurring, where like, is it the mentality of what I'm supposed to look like as a functioning adult in some condition of economic stability to have this form of like denaturalization of desire into this form of like success, which is just standard comfortability, while like recognizing it in contrast with like generations that also, while had more like an economic, different like economic condition, also was less, we can, you know, be honest, like a less globalized condition, or at least globalized in a different condition, in a different way. And it just made me kind of like think specifically like about the baby boomers, like the mentality of baby boomers and kind of like post-war, how does that play into how they achieve money and success? We're allowed to do it. And then of course, coming to younger generations, how we are perceiving that, how we're feeling the achings, where like economics come into, and maybe even the possibilities of predictive marketing, or like, sorry, actually not predictive marketing, but like facets of like polymarket, which, you know, questioning the legality of that, like how is predictive marketing betting even allowed? But it's just kind of like a lot of sporadic thoughts that I would just kind of wanted to put out that the conversation had me really curious about. And I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm just kind of like, but I just wanted to share.
Yeah, I wanted to actually add something to what Chikori was saying that I think it's very interesting. And one thing that I was thinking about these last couple of days ago, particularly about home owning and like the whole act of like sort of like buying a house and how does that work and so on and so forth. Like in Brazil, there's right now, at least in the city that I live in, it's a very young city. It's less than 100 years old, right? So it's a new city for by almost all parameters, right? And and of course, urban planning in Brazil in particular is crazy. Like they planned the city for 20,000 people. There's already like 1.5 million. So I don't think that's it's very. You can imagine how the city center is, let alone the rest, right? But it's a very particular type of city. But one of the things that was getting to me is how the possession of land and the way that you extract that you can actually speculate on the price of land has changed because before like a lot of there's a lot of stories of people that are still alive in this in the city whose families were, for instance, like they had bought a huge land property in what then became an expensive neighborhood. So like they literally got rich out of that. So like they went there were like 20,000 people, and they and the family got uber rich because of one or two sales of like a huge property that then became like eligible for residences. The family just like skyrocketed in terms of possessions and became like some of the rich families of the city. And a lot of those families were not really like, you wouldn't call them poor, obviously, but like they were families of liberal professionals, so like lawyers and doctors. So like they were speculating like that. And right now it seems that there's and of course it was very few people that could do that, and there were very few opportunities to do so. But right now it seems that they want to make this type of speculation accessible to everyone, and like so you have, for instance, like here in Brazil, it's very common you can buy shares in touristic cities. So let's say that like you have this place that kind of looks like a hotel, you buy a share of that, and then there's like every year you get, I don't know, 7 days a year in which you actually can go, and then you split that 7 days with like all the other people. So that apartment is owned by, I don't know, 20 families, and it's rented all throughout. So it kind of like gets that. There's a lot of financial advisors that say, okay, you buy an apartment that is being built, and then what you do is you actually transform it into an Airbnb or like a midterm rental, and then you can actually pay the financing because of the interest rate. You can pay the financing through the rent. So you have an apartment that kind of like you're just throwing your name there, and you're kind of like outsourcing the payment of that, right? So there's a lot of like arrangements having that. So on the one hand, we have the feeling that like we're never really going to be able to own anything, right? To own a house or to own a place, or that's going to become difficult. But there's always a chance to speculate on something. I think that this dichotomy is very funny, that like you always have the business opportunity to do one of those things, and even like in very small places, and you can get very cheap apartments in some of those places that are being built. But it seems that actually like the traditional route is just very difficult to achieve, right?
Well, thank you for everyone sharing these narratives. I have to say, I'm physically building part of this narrative for me is I'm physically building a house by hand with just me and my girlfriend on a remote island in the North Pacific in Canada. And there is so much physical labor. It's actually making me kind of dumb. Like I'm becoming a bit of like a meathead that eats like lots of beef and has gained huge amounts of weight because you're lifting huge boards all day. But there is a reason why why houses are expensive. And also any design change you make from the cheapest thing also just makes it more expensive. I mean, so yeah, but then there's solutions like mass housing that I guess we could come back to. I guess that could be something to bring up in a later classes. You know, all the council housing that's made in the UK, socialist housing programs, public housing, and this kind of imagination of what you can do with a factory. It's kind of mass production, and how the problem isn't really how much we can make, but it's how much we can consume. So it's about producing the consumers, but then we have to start thinking about the problem of land and where those units are going to be, because we have the technology, we have the materials, we can be really producing. In some ways, we just end up being kind of in the West, many places were kind of landlocked regarding development spaces. And that's one of the advantages the boomers had. They believed in modernity, and they had all these huge institutions of growth. And they had this great explosion of energy and the hydrocarbon economy globally that it produced so much. If we're talking about housing, we can talk about spatial wealth, and in some ways we have internalized the critique of the monstrosities that the boomer generation, the spaces that they inhabited, because it's actually their parents that kind of built all this wealth and built all these institutions. So in some ways this is like a yes in my backyard argument. It's also an argument that would be in Ezra Klein's book Abundance, that we have to tackle affordability and production. Part of it is just this emphasizing a process rather than outcome. And we can think about China as a critique of the United States in terms of emphasizing outcome of having social having economic and social and infrastructural outcomes that they're just saying they're going to accomplish, but not having any process. Um, I think that's a kind of flip side of our existence in the West. These narratives regarding about speculation and land and expansion, you also have to, of course, we've talked about settler colonialism and how these are settler colonial narratives. I haven't spent any time in Brazil, but those, Raphael, would you call, is Brazil a settler colony? I believe it is. How would you narrate this?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are, I mean, in Canada, it's, you know, the country was formed by a number of, you know, corporations we can think of, international, you know, they're from, you know, formed on the stock market. They were about commodities and the commodity of land and the development of the railroad and people becoming rich out of these economic systems, patterns, conglomerations. And then, but also what happens is when we have either the patterns have been stopped because of we have internalized the critique of this development of modernity, or they've also just maybe reached their end stage, right? Like it's just that's just their plateau. I mean, if you think about speculation and rent seeking, and there's only just so much rent that you can extract, right? There is just sort of end stages for markets. I'm just ad-libbing here. I'm just adding to the conversation. So I don't feel I'm making false claims, but I wasn't preparing. I'm trying to respond. But thank you for everybody's additions to the conversation. I'm going to try to pick up all the threads moving forward.
You know, you were saying about like this role of like that Canada, there's a lot of involvement of companies in terms of also like the way that the territory was kind of developed, right?
Yeah, it's a few. I mean, there's the Hudson's Bay Company, there's a Northwest Company. They were involved in fur trading. I had the most incredible experience recently, a couple years ago in Winnipeg. I was in the Exchange District, which used to be the center point of the continent for the trains coming between, like before the Panama Canal, right? The Exchange District would be one of these places where commodities were traded. And after the Panama Canal, all those mercantile wealth left Winnipeg. But there was a building filled with furs. First of all, it's just incredible to go to a warehouse full of furs. You're like looking at things that were formerly alive, that the image of their aliveness is made into almost like a picture that is stacked into things that are kind of the same. So they're made into commodities, right? And it's like, I was like, oh my God, having this experience. And there was Indigenous people bringing in their trapped furs to, you know, receive, you know, money. I guess this is for the fur trade. And I was like, oh, I cannot believe I am having this almost like foundational experience of being Canadian. Yeah. So, anyways, this is one of those. But I mean, the fur trade in Canada, like when America had the slave trade, the fur trade was a joint venture. So our place during that same period within the world system was a joint venture that made many Indigenous people very wealthy. So, I mean, it's its own complex Interesting narrative.
Yeah. I was asking about the company, the thing with the companies, because here in Brazil, like of course it's still like it falls under like the sort of like settler colonial narrative. There's not much. There's like of course, um, like just a humongous amount of like slave trade coming in and so on and so forth, but also of sort of like capture of indigenous people, like when they were going into the country, right, looking for gold and so on and so forth. But particularly like between the 19th century, 20th century, there are cities in Brazil that they have the name of particular companies that were actually founding that city. So it's a very funny thing. Like when you look at a city and you see that the city has a quite weird name, and you're like, okay, what's that about? And then you see that it's actually the name of a company that is already like long gone and gone bankrupt, or of a company that doesn't really do that thing anymore. Like there's two examples of that. Like my uh close to the hometown of my girlfriend. She's from like same region as I am, but like further into Brazil, right? They have a city that's called Jamiki, which we always found the name very weird. And then we found out that it was like Japan colonization, immigration, something, something. That was basically where the Japanese immigrants all went to that, and the company that was bringing them sort of founded that city and sold them land and kind of like outsource that type of like immigration policy from the state, right? And the same thing with there's also Ford actually had a city in Brazil. They founded a city that's called Fordlândia, kind of like Fordland, which was in the boom of latex, right? So like when latex was still not like industrially synthesized commodity, when you would have to go actually um, to the Seringa trees, and you have like there's a almost like half artisanal project to actually extract it. They had a city that was in the middle of the Amazon that was called Fort Lanja. There's a lot of like, and the city right now is like almost abandoned. I think it became like a village in the last couple of years because the city is just like shrinking and shrinking. But yeah, I find this very interesting, like this process as well of like that a lot of those cities sometimes they're like 50 years old and sometimes even less. So like they were relatively new cities. Like all of them also like below 100 years old. So it's a very strange way. Those cities are almost all of them very weird, right? And very peculiar. So because if the company is thriving, then everything on that city is kind of like revolving around that particular company. And when the company kind of like breaks, the life of the city drastically changes, and it becomes sort of like either a city where people just live because it's cheaper than to live in a place by, but like they work in the other place, or it becomes just like isolated place that everybody is almost bound to leave, right? After a while. So yeah, I'm kind of interested in that.
When I was shooting Infrastructure Canada, I visited many natural resource extraction towns. And when I returned to, my kind of beautiful neighborhood in Toronto where I was living, I could just feel the value of having this diverse economy and all these different people around. And I'm like, oh my God, this is just incredible being in a big, complex city versus these, like a mining town that just, these mining towns, they're very much aware. I believe one of the oppressive qualities of Canada is how much it's a landscape based off of the global markets. And that you really, besides just knowing the price of oil, because you're totally reliant upon hydrocarbons for moving these huge distances, you're very much aware of the value of the commodity that you're part of the supply chain somehow, right? So if it's wheat, potash, oil products like natural gas or the tar sands, or lentils, There really copper, nickel. It's just, yeah, in these towns there really is this feeling. I mean, was it the business cycles in all of these industries? I mean, the business cycle in real estate's brutal, but the business cycle within commodities is just this boom and bust. It's just, everybody making huge amounts of money, doing huge amounts of drugs, buying all this stuff. Then it's like this long bust that, I mean, it could last 7-10 years before everything recovers again, which is, I don't know, it's not quite a generation, but it really marks the landscape. The place I live in part-time on the west coast of Canada, it's a place where they still had huge, great ancient trees, and they still had this incredible ecosystem of fish up into the 80s. And they chopped all the fish down, and they chopped all the trees down, and they caught all the fish. And this native logger guy told me, "You won't believe how much we just traded all of it for cocaine." But the landscape is just still of the wealth from that moment, like the Camaros, the Trans Ams, all these huge boats and houses that were made in that era that then has been like it's all being kind of reclaimed by nature now. It's yeah. I'm Raphael. I'm riffing off your narrative.
Yeah, no, I think this is very interesting actually, because I have the feeling that there's a lot of like a lot of similarities actually by the way that it works with the extraction of natural resources, right? And I think that there's I don't know how that conversation is in Canada, but there's a lot of I would say that there is a sort of a new frontier of that opening up with rare minerals, particularly for computation, right? So like I think they're called in English as well, like rare minerals or something like that. When you're talking about like silicon and also like some other minerals that are used in generators and microchips and all of those things. And at least here in Brazil, it's been like a big conversation because there's a lot of cities that were within that mining circuit before, and they kind of got out of it and they became cities mostly based on like the third sector, right? So like you have it's a city of stores and of services and so on and so forth, and they want to return to that because they see like a potential of like booming that once again, and also the type of oil extraction that we're doing close to the coast of Rio de Janeiro and all those places. The city halls are getting a bunch of money because of the oil that is basically like on the layer right below, like on the it's a sort of like an oceanic type of like extraction that you get. And there's just a lot of money being made on that move of sort of like um, rehashing the first sector for either stuff that was not able to be extracted before, such as the case of the oil in Brazil, that like it was too deep into the sea, so you couldn't extract it in a economically viable manner before, but right now it's like resurging, and also this increasing demand for processors and chips and rare earth that really I think maybe we'll see another boom of that in our like maybe worldwide, like on those like foundation of cities and like that a new boom of extractivism with like commodities that are not really on the map yet, that like they are used for something for sure and they have been extracted before, but maybe they're gonna be like repacked as something else, right? Or for another utility.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that's interesting to think about, all these critical minerals that's also happening in Canada. And I'm not pro-extractivist, but I'm not anti-extractivist per se. We just want to think very critically about, transforming, the earth. um, Okay, so hang on, Laura, you just before we finish, you put all these things in the chat. Do you want to tell us a bit about it? So we're not ignoring your contribution.
Just super briefly, because it's just things that came to mind. When we were reading about Derive and Gita I recently encountered this text, which is like a very sweet and gentle history of basically Cyrillus, Fluxus, Situationis walking. And I found a nice PDF. I was doing some research on walking because I'm working on a review of the Performer Biennial. And there was a walking tour, many walking tours as part of that. And then the second link, I found a copy of it on Anna's archive. So I'm sure if you're interested in finding your own, you would be able to. I was chatting with a friend about this class, and he mentioned this academic that I might be interested in. Maybe other people would be interested in some good decolonial theory by an Indigenous Australian academic that is. I think his critique, my friend's critique of this text was that maybe it wasn't Marxist enough. So I'm yet to find out what that means. But she's talking about literally the colonial technologies of architecture, building, taking possession of land, if anyone's interested in those discourses.
Yeah, thank you. So how are we going to save this? Do you want to post it into the Google Classroom, or should I? I don't want us to.
Yeah, I totally can. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm not sure how we're doing our record keeping. Matthias, you also do you want to give us a little blurb for this book you recommended? Maybe Matthias isn't there. Okay. Okay, so, and thank you everybody for this excellent conversation. Housing and speculation and capitalism seems to be themes that everyone's concerned about. The next class is on this topic. Okay, first of all, does anyone want to present in this next seminar? It's sort of more interesting to have many minds try to grapple with these texts and concepts rather than just me give a lecture. I mean, I can totally just talk about all the text, but does anyone else want to?
Would it be a presentation of the pre-seminar memo? Will we just
Yeah, it could be a presentation of your pre-seminar memo, for example. But I mean, you're not forced to do it, just if anyone wants to. I mean, I think it makes it a more dynamic situation. But yeah. Do you want to volunteer?
Why not?
Okay. But do you want to maybe zoom in on one of the particular texts, or one or two? You don't have to do them all. It's just like.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I haven't looked over the next class readings, but I'll definitely zoom in on one of them and probably do a focus.
Okay, so just to introduce people to the text, I mean, to the concept, the next one, it's on something called typology. And so this is one of the books we're going to look at. I have to kind of photograph it, and I couldn't find it on Anna's archive. And this is this local particularity of, it's like, what is the grain of the city made of? And there's a number of things that come together, like technology, culture, tradition, but also the shape of the pieces of land, and there's planning. And so we're going to be trying to zoom in on the particularities of the units of urbanism, talking about typology and the urban lot. And I have to admit, I found it kind of challenging when I was getting introduced to all these things, but it really will give when the tool, this is like really like architecture-y, but it gives one the tools to understand different urban fabrics and contexts. Anyways, I absolutely love it, and there's a few of my favorite texts of all time in there. one being this really cool book. So yeah, that's what we're going to do next week on Friday. Thank you for joining us. You're welcome to contact me at any time.
I have a very quick question. Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I did see in the syllabus though that are there expected memos for every class, like leading up to our final work?
Yeah, so I mean, like we had like 3, I had like 4 maybe this year. I mean, whatever, it's first class. I mean, it's also, we're having a short summer. It's basically, the idea is that writing is thinking, right? Like you have thoughts, but you need to clarify them into this code, which is language. And that if you come already having written, there was another seminar at the New Center on communism with Chinese characteristics. This is what he did, and I experienced it as a graduate student myself. And it's labor intensive, but it really brings the seminar up a notch if everybody's already written something. And it also gives me a chance to read them so I can be in like the frame of mind of like trying to see what the vibe is and maybe respond or do a bit of research. Okay. Did I over respond to you?
No, that's perfect. Made perfect sense. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks everybody. I'm gonna stop the recording.